Okay, here we go. Let's talk about China's classical age. Let me fix this and maybe get a little more comfortable here doing the slideshow, talking about China's classical age. It's about 220 BCE, as you can see. Kind of an interesting time period. Chinese civilization is remarkable. There are periods of intense creativity. It's an amazing civilization. It's huge today. There are also periods when they're incredibly violent and periods of domestic turmoil and all kinds of palace intrigues among emperors and various factions fighting to control the empire. But let's look at China. A bit about China, just the geography. You've got deserts there, you've got mountains, you've got grasslands. One of the things about China is it's sort of protected geographically from invasion, and what you see on the outskirts of Chinese civilizations are various nomadic tribes. What distinguishes China is that China becomes an agriculturally based civilization. Now, today, when we look at China, China is massive, a huge territory today. It was much smaller in the ancient world. Today, we're looking at China that includes these regions: Tibet, Inner Mongolia, Turkestan, Manchuria, and different parts of China in the past had greater significance than other parts of China. One of the things going on here is that there are two major rivers that sort of dominate Chinese geography and impact China in terms of the types of crops that the Chinese grow and survive on. In the north, there is the Yellow River, yellow because it deposits a rich silt known as loess, which is yellow in color, unbelievably rich with nutrients that allows Chinese to grow crops in drier weather, because northern China is a bit drier, and in particular wheat and millet, these grain crops. You don't have to leave the soil fallow. That is, you can plant constantly on the soil because it's so nutrient rich. Southern China is a bit different. Climate's different, a little warmer, wetter. There's more rain there, and it's in southern China where you see this major river, the Yangtze River, and all of its tributaries. It's a little more navigable than the Yellow River, those tributaries. It's also in the south where you see the domestication and the growing of rice production in the south. And we think of rice as a sort of essential item within the Chinese diet today, because it is, and also in Japan and elsewhere, and in South Louisiana. We like rice. We grow rice around here. Here's thanks to China, as you can see up here, some of the civilizations that emerge in the north and in the south. We're going to look at this. You can see where the fertile loess soil is, the monsoon season, and these are some of the early Neolithic settlements. And we see Neolithic villages popping up in China around 5000 BCE. That is, village communities where people live in villages and they grow their own agriculture to survive on. As I said early on, it's millet, so it tells you that they're settling in the north, as you could see. In the north, they were settling to grow millet along the Yellow River. But in the south later on is where they begin rice cultivation and also domestication of various animals. You know, the water buffalo, which is used in farming in the south, as well as other things, pigs and dogs, various cattle, all these things. The problem with these Neolithic settlements is that our knowledge of them is quite limited because they don't leave written records. Maybe they had some form of writing that we're unaware of, but they don't leave written records. But this civilization does. This is when you begin to see the creation of cities, more urban-based communities, and that's with the Shang dynasty. It looks like Shang, but the Shang dynasty that happens around 1500 and lasts for about 450 or so years. Shang kings, centered around Anyang for a brief period. This is a place that was excavated by archaeologists. They begin to discover through archaeological research a fair amount about this society. And then the language is going to be discovered. It's a civilization that's part of the Bronze Age. Shang kings were warriors. They used bronze weapons. They used chariots. That's a major technology. Armies weren't incredibly large, but Shang kings had militaries that were more powerful than their others. And so they would go on wars of conquest, wars of destruction, but also wars to capture supplies and to get wealthier. That's where some of their wealth came from, and that's where they got slaves. That's how they extended their empire and extended their control over society. So they got rich through wars, and they acquired additional slaves. And They also are important because of the way they sort of behaved and justified their rule. Shang kings consider themselves to be high priests who were in contact with the various gods and goddesses within China. It's a polytheistic world, especially the chief god De. And what they would do is communicate with the chief god De through their ancestors. Some time ago in Chinese history, you had a number of Chinese farmers who were digging around Anyang and elsewhere, and they found what they would call dragon bones. And they thought they had some sort of mystical qualities and some sort of health benefits. So what they would do is bring these bones to an apothecary, have them ground up, and then dispensed in powder form or put in a liquid so they could drink if they had a stomach ache or something like that. So they thought they had medicinal purposes. But scholars came along and said, no, this is a form of writing, because what you would see is that the king would use these things to interpret the past and figure out how to act in the future. What the king would do was use cattle bones or tortoise shells, various turtle shells, write something on it like, will I be successful in battle? Will we have a good harvest? Will I have lots of sons? Something like that. And they would heat this item and it would crack. And it's the cracks that would be interpreted. And sometimes the answers would be written on there. So this is how they divine the past. This is how they communicated with ancestors, with the gods and goddesses, to maybe act in a certain way. So that's one of the interesting things. Shang kings are buried in elaborate tombs. And one of the things, just like sort of pharaohs were, where they had all these things they needed in the present life, they might need in the afterlife, including human beings, some of which were killed before being buried, and some would be buried in the tombs alive. So the Shang kings. What's most important about the Shangs, really their legacy, is this system of writing. It's going to be a logographic system of writing that survives until today with some modifications. A logographic system of writing means every symbol has a word attached to it, and also a phonetic sound. Now, those phonetic sounds have changed over time, but each symbol represents a word. So you look at some of these symbols here. These are some of the, this is a little example of how the writing developed. Ox. You know, obviously there's some change over time, but one of the things this does is because there's a fair amount of consistency in some of this, it's easier to learn the language that they wrote in the past. So Chinese civilization, you know, keeps this style of language with modifications up until the modern era, a logographic system. And if you want to read a Chinese newspaper, you probably need to know at least 3, maybe 4,000 different symbols in order to do that. I'm a big fan of our alphabet, and educated Chinese learn about 7,000 symbols as well. So it's a very complicated system, which meant that those who mastered it had a prominent place within society. But it's a system that's going to be adopted elsewhere. This logographic script now, modern Vietnam uses something differently, but it allows people to read some of these ancient texts, and it brings a bit of linguistic unity to some parts of the world so that you can read what these different languages, people in different societies with different languages are doing. It facilitates communication. And when I said this is what lasts at that time, one of the great achievements of the Shang dynasty. Shang are going to come to an end. A dynasty does. Over time, other Chinese civilizations emerge that are more powerful. One of these is a group of people known as the Zhou. It looks like Zhou or Zhu. It's pronounced Zhou. That's easy for us in America to remember, Zhou. And so what they do is conquer. They kill and behead the last Shang king. They accuse him of being a womanizer, that he's more interested in women and wine and all kinds of disreputable behaviors. You know, and they take over. And one of the things they do to justify their rule is they come up with this concept of the mandate of heaven. And you can read about this in an early book about the Zhou dynasty, early records of the Zhou dynasty, known as the Book of Documents. But this mandate of heaven becomes very, very significant. That is, they justify their rule by looking at the Zhou rulers as sort of immoral. And what they have come along to create a more moral society, because they govern through the mandate of heaven. The gods essentially approve of this. That's one way you can justify your rule. You know, you could justify your rule and say, I'm emperor because some dude on Bourbon Street thought it would be a good idea. No, I rule because I have the mandate of heaven. That's what people are going to respect more than others. So they use that to justify their rule. They also set up a decentralized form of rule, and we see some of this develop later on in Europe, called a feudal system, and later on in Japan, in which they put hereditary lords, nobles, powerful people in charge of various territories throughout their empire. It's a feudal system. The emperor at the top, but powerful lords with titles like duke, marquis, who hold important positions, and these are hereditary positions. They pass their title on to their sons, and they control large regions. They have their own armies as well, and some of these people compete to become emperor as well. And so the Zhou don't always have control over society. And sometimes there's a lot of palace intrigue that goes on as well. The Zhou practice something called concubinage. Concubinage is kind of having not just an extra wife, but women on the side. You have lots of sons, and there's a lot of intrigue that happens between concubines as the mothers of these sort of kind of illegitimate sons of the emperor try to position their son to take over or to have an important position or to become an aristocrat or something like that. Later on, we'll see some of these emperors turn to eunuchs, castrated men who don't have any sort of family allegiances or any potential kids they could have as advisors because of all the scheming that goes on with the concubines. And by the way, you can read about some of the Zhou beliefs in another book, the Book of Songs, a book of poetry, actually, Book of Songs, which talks about sort of social beliefs at that time, religious beliefs, and there's songs in there as well. It's called the Book of Songs. But the Zhou, there's some innovations that are going to occur and continue and also bring about the downfall of the Zhou. This is a time when iron begins to replace bronze, and they embrace iron technology. Bronze technology was under the Shang, iron technology under the Zhou. And it's sort of how they organize society as well. And they get lots and lots of people to work in the iron industry. But what happens at times is that a number of these nobles adopt these new techniques of warfare, develop iron weapons, and also change the way they conduct war. So what you see are powerful nobles rising in China to overthrow the Zhou, and then they begin to fight with each other. So you have lots of these nobles, these aristocrats who have powerful militaries that have changed. You had chariot warfare earlier. Chariots are going to be replaced by infantry, the foot soldier armed with a new weapon, a very powerful and accurate crossbow. Where lots of these things can be made and they're more accurate, chariot warfare cannot stand up to huge numbers of infantry armed with the crossbow, and also can't do as well as cavalrymen, men on horseback, protected with armor, helmets. They use leather and iron for this. So warfare changes and nobles become very powerful. They develop their own armies. They use these techniques. And what you enter is a period known as the Warring States period. It's not a good time. Period of instability, all kinds of problems, all kinds of warfare. There are periods of peace within here, but there's also periods of fighting in the Warring States period. It's going to come to an end when the Qin take over. We'll talk about that in a second. Notice it's QIN, but that's Qin. That should be interesting because Qin is related to China. That's the dynasty that's going to get where we get the name China from. During this time period, there's also a treatise on warfare, how to be a good soldier, how to be a good leader, The Art of War by Sun Wu. What's essential for him is not heroism, particularly silly heroism, where you may endanger others, reckless heroism, I should say. Instead, what you need to be is a disciplined soldier, and you need to someone who obeys commanders. You need to be disciplined, and you need to be loyal to commanders. And commanders are successful based on their talents, based on their ability to lead others, and the ability to practice certain things like the art of deception as well. In prior ages, you had aristocrats who served as military leaders. Now, anyone who has these talents to sort of move up in society and become a military leader, if they embrace these new ideas in the art of war. Now, one of the things that comes on, and you see that often in periods of turmoil, is that ideas come along to maybe bring some order to society. You see new religious ideas in different societies. In China, what you begin to see during the Warring States period or new philosophies that are emerged to bring greater order to society, to teach certain virtues. It's a time period when you have a lot of different thoughts. It's called the 100 schools of thought. We're only going to talk about a couple of them, but these are important thinkers who try to figure out how best to bring order to society and what's best for people to live under. Not warfare, it's more peace. You've probably heard about Confucius, whose writings are in the Analects. One of the things that happens with Confucius, and I'm jumping ahead here, there's a nice little image. Confucian scholars do unto others. Treat others how they would treat you. That's the virtue that Confucius is talking about. And these writings are in the Analects. What he's looking back on is this other age, when you had more order in society under the Zhou, when people had certain obligations, they fulfilled certain devotions, when people knew their role in society, when children practiced filial piety to a greater degree. Now, some of this is nostalgia, but children did this. That is, they were more obedient and respected those who gave them life, their parents, filial piety. And so what Confucius believes in is promoting virtue. He doesn't believe in social equality. He does between friends, but not social equality in society. So you have like we have upper class, middle class, lower class. You have aristocrats in society. You have royalty, aristocrats, and others, commoners. But each group has a certain role and function in life. That is, what he's proposing is that there are virtues that need to be learned and practiced, in which we all have a mutual set of obligations to perform, but also expectations to others, kind of gentlemanly conduct, treat each other, again, as you would want to be treated. And these are the different relationships between father and son, younger brother, older brother, those things, how people need to be treated. What he says is the ultimate virtue is to be human, humanity, embrace your humanity and care and be concerned for others. People can learn these things by studying. They can learn how to behave better. And this is about behaving better on earth based on certain virtuous principles he believes, not through meditation like you would see with the Buddha, or not through religious belief. You know, even rulers should be virtuous, embrace humanity by caring for their subjects as well. Now, Confucian thought develops later on by a number of people, one of whom is Mencius, a guy by the name of Mencius, who argues that human nature is essentially good, and rulers need to bring out the good in people. Like Confucius, he traveled to advise rulers how to act virtuously, he didn't really refer as much that you have the mandate of heaven, but you do want to act as though you are behaving in a way that heaven would approve. And sometimes he has specific ideas about how to be a good moral ruler. That is, cut taxes, don't be too harsh, don't treat people too harshly, don't punish them too harshly. Another guy, Zunzi, is another one, a Confucian scholar. He has a different idea about human nature. He's a lot more pessimistic about people. He says people are, instead where Mencius says people are naturally good, he thinks people are naturally wicked, and they really have to be taught a lot about virtue. And one of the ways to teach them about virtue is to get them involved in certain rituals as well. It brings sort of order and organization to their lives. It has important effects on people if they learn certain virtues, certain rituals. If you're Catholic, you might think about the rituals within the Catholic Church, how important they are to being a good Catholic, following these rituals. That's kind of what he's talking about, but not necessarily in a religious way. He wants to apply Confucian ideas in that way to teach people to behave in a virtuous manner. Now, there's another school in this 100 schools of thought, the Taoists. The Taoists talk about the Tao, the way, this sort of universal force that governs society, part of our natural order. I often, when I think of this, I often think of Star Wars. Let the force be with you. Let the natural order of the world be with you. And the best thing to do is to follow the natural order, is to sort of ignore politics, ignore Confucian. What Taoists believe is that you try to make people better, you're only going to make things worse. Rulers should leave people alone. Instead, people should focus on their own lives instead of this sort of political affairs that govern society, and follow the natural order, the way, follow the force, so to speak. There's another school of thought that comes along, and that school is called legalism. Legalism, as you can imagine, refers to a legal system, laws. laws that aren't necessarily virtuous, but laws that bring order to society. Remember, it's the warring state periods where people are fighting each other, they're dying, who's in charge. It's based on brute force and strength, and it brings misery to a lot of lives. How do you change that system? You create a legal system that controls society. Good, effective laws that work. And what makes them effective? They work, they restore order. And procedures that people have to follow that creates order in society. It's not because they're moral, it's because they are effective and create order. That's what the legalists think. And this is part of the Chinese bureaucracy. Think about rules that govern society, rules in bureaucracies. And I'm not suggesting that bureaucratic rules actually make sense or make us better, but they keep us in line, right? They do that. And what the legalists believe, people like Hans Fei-tzu, thinking about Han Solo in Star Wars, Han Fei-tzu, is that the rules have to be harsh, but they have to be enforced. And what you begin to see is rulers adopt this ideas, because under legalist ideas, rulers have absolute power. No aristocrats should be able to challenge the rule of an emperor. You shouldn't be able to debate the value, or you're not supposed to debate the value of a particular law. You just have to impose that law and make sure your subjects follow it in order to impose order. And that's what Hans Fei-tzu and others begin to support. Keep the population in line, but also keep government officials in line. Make them understand those rules and follow those rules and regulations within the bureaucracy that the bureaucracy developed. People are crazy. We'll look at this later on, maybe with similarities. Maybe later on we talk about the Renaissance and Machiavelli. What makes a government effective? It works. That's what's effective. Not whether it's virtuous. It works. Not whether it's moral. What works and brings order. And that's what Hans Fei-tzu and a number of legalists say. You have to impose harsh rules on society to produce order in society. And this is where we begin. If I go back to this thing, one of the, out of the warring state periods, one group, the Qin, Quin, are going to emerge victorious and establish their dynasty in China. It's a short-lived dynasty, but they embrace legalist principles. The Qin do, and you can see they're very important, the Qin, because it's the dynasty that, even though it doesn't last long, it's the dynasty that China is going to be named after. Now, another thing that happens in dynasty, yin in China as well, another idea, yin and yang, this sort of force in society. It's not the Tao, but this force in society that reflects sort of the importance of a feminine side and a masculine side, or I should say the forces in society that represent the feminine side of people and nature and the world around us, and the masculine side as well. We tend to think about femininity or masculinity today, in particular in the West, we view them as social constructions. We toss out labels like sexism if you say this is feminist or this is or this is masculine or that. This is not what China is really talking about. China is talking, and China is different. Those are Western ideas. China is different. That is, what the Chinese believe is that we all have a part of this. These things, yin and yang, are part of humanity, part of society, and they're not oppositional forces. They are complementary forces, just like husband and wife complement them and help the family. These are complementary forces within nature. They explain the changing of the seasons, which are important in the agricultural calendar. They talk about the changes within night and day as well. Yin and yang, these are part of yin and yang, these forces that govern society. And when yin and yang are in perfect balance and they're in harmony, things go well. When they are not, when they are out of balance, things do not go well. That's when you have problems in society, or problems in your own life, or problems in whatever. So yin and yang are these sort of complementary forces, masculinity and femininity, that the Chinese hold in high regard as well. And we will stop right there.